Hey everybody, welcome. It's a cold, raw day, and we're going to hang out in my fly tying studio here and talk about the North American conservation model. I know you'd probably think I'm beating a dead horse with it, but it's a pretty complicated philosophy that's turned into really applicable theory, and arguably the North American conservation model is the best model for environmental preservation and conservation ever. Certainly can be improved upon, but it's really proved to be pretty astounding in the modern age. So it stems from Aldo Leopold, who his influence on the North American conservation model is really the scientific element of it, and that any decisions made in regard to harvesting animals or developing seasons, etc., have to be made in a way that ensures that the harvest will either maintain or improve wildlife habitat or habitat numbers. This is really different from, kind of the feudalistic society that and feudalistic landscape that America was born from in the old world of England, and all of Europe. You had wild animals or game species that were owned by lords and kings. In fact, my wife can trace her lineage back to an overseer of the king's deer, which is kind of ironic. That landscape didn't equate to equality or environmental sustainability or conservation or ecology. None of that existed at that time, and it suffered for that. The United States wasn't any different. Recognize that with the idea of Manifest Destiny and the westward expansion, there was massive devastation to both flora and fauna, and by the turn of the century, many wild animals and game species were in peril. So Leopold really seeks to change that, and it's kind of this combination of technology as well as social consciousness that allows for what we have today, which is the simple fact that there isn't any wild game species in the United States is at threat because of hunting and fishing and trapping. It's quite the opposite. Those recreational or sustainable activities have actually allowed for biodiversity to thrive in modern time. So how does it do that? It's kind of sad on one level, but Leopold recognizes that economic viability within the United States is going to rely upon industry and development, etc., and that isn't going to change, and perhaps never is going to change. But within that system, is there a way in which human beings can, in fact, develop a symbiotic relationship with nature, wherein they can extract resources, but in doing so, give back, maybe even more than they take? Pretty simple concept, but one that's pretty hard to put into practice, and one that Leopold really spells out. Extraction of resources, but give back. So we recognize that the key to a healthy landscape is biodiversity. Biodiversity referring to landscape diversity, species diversity, as well as genetic diversity. And in order to promote or maintain that diversity, there is managerial practices that have to happen. So prior to European colonization here in the United States, there was also wildlife management that was going on by native peoples. But on a broad scale, those really large systems or connections, ecological connections that maintain balance, were no longer applicable because of fragmentation, pollution, etc., etc. So the idea that we could potentially preserve what we have and then build upon that preservation and make more of it while maintaining economic viability and a good quality of life for both plants, animals, and humans, was really what Leopold's objective was. So how does he do that? Well, it's really enacted by agencies all across the United States, but here in Vermont, it's Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And what Vermont Fish and Wildlife does is they sell licenses. And those licenses allow for monies that then can be allocated for conservation measures. So how does that happen? Well, it's pretty easy. The monies that are generated go directly into actual land acquisition and preservation. So there are wildlife management areas all across Vermont that you can hunt and fish in. They're open. And then Fish and Wildlife also partners with other conservation groups to maintain healthy habitats. That does need to be policed. So there's a law enforcement aspect of it. So that's game wardens. So, keep in mind, prior to Leopold, there really are no laws surrounding the harvest of animals. Animals are considered a resource that is to be consumed immediately, or even worse than that, they're considered a nuisance that have to be cleared out, like the buffalo, or they're just there for blood sport. And Leopold's like, no, we have got to do this differently. We need to be able to extract in order to promote healthier ecosystems. So law enforcement with game wardens who make sure that laws are being followed that actually enact that conservation model. Education. So things like conservation camp, maybe some of you have gone to those. And then even non-game. So Fish and Wildlife has a collective of wildlife biologists who go out into the forest to learn more about different wildlife species and to promote them. So, so many different animals that you're very familiar with can be attributed to Fish and Wildlife. Things like turkey. There were no turkey at the turn of the century. Even white-tailed deer, beaver, fisher, marten, all these animals were brought back from extinction because of monies that were generated by the selling of licenses and principles of sustainable harvest that allowed for habitat to become healthier and healthier. So, for example, if you have too many deer in an area and those deer could potentially collapse from disease or famine, you take some deer out to ensure that there's still a healthy deer population. But you could really do that in even more complicated way and look at something like fisher, who were brought in as a fur bearer species. They're a voracious predator, but they also were able to control porcupine, which were taking too many deer out. So these are all things that perhaps would have happened on in 1,000 years with kind of societal collapse, but because we're not looking towards societal collapse, and we also would like to have healthy ecosystems within a human time frame, we have brought these animals in by monies developed or garnered through license sales to be able to do that. So it's not only license sales, but it's also the Lawrence Pittman Fund, which generates money by the sales of ammunition and firearms and fishing equipment. A little bit of that sale goes back to conservation initiatives. So really, the health of our landscapes, the beauty that you know of as Vermont, the wildlife that you see has been on the backs of hunters and fishermen. And I'm not sure why, but it seems like in the modern age that's been lost. People don't recognize that the real purpose of hunting and fishing in this country, it has an economic element to it, but it also has a heavy-handed conservation element. It's not just blood sport, and it's not just your right either. This is a scientific endeavor that has bore a lot of fruit. So there's nothing in the Constitution that says you get to hunt and fish. But thankfully, we have laws in every state in the United States that look at the North American conservation model. The scary thing is recently we've had a real fall in the numbers of people buying hunting and fishing licenses. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that we know that hunting and fishing is passed down generationally, and there are more and more broken homes. So less of that anthropological knowledge is being passed down from one family member to the other. Another is that there's less and less places to be able to go hunt and fish, and there's more and more private ownership of land, and that then becomes posted, so it becomes harder and harder for people to do that. Interestingly, our highest numbers for hunting especially came after World War II in Vietnam, where soldiers that had been living out in the woods and in camps really almost wanted to reenact that in peacetime, and kind of brought their buddies out into hunting camps and things like that. And we're not seeing nearly as much of that anymore. But what we do see is the largest demographic of person that is getting involved in hunting and fishing is indeed females, which is something that I'm very happy to hear. So this is something that we can be really proud of, and it's something that I believe is worth sustaining and really worth paying attention to. Really, in the end, hunting and fishing is about environmental sustainability through Leopold's scientific, secular understanding of give and take within ecological systems. The idea that we have the ability, largely through monies and good science, to be able to manipulate landscapes so that they become healthier and healthier, and they promote biological diversity, thus healthy communities of both people and plants and animals. So I hope that helps. Maybe I'll get up and give you another lecture later on, but I hope this gives you food for thought as you move forward on the questions that I've asked you. Thanks for paying attention, and I hope you're doing well. Bye.